Hey, welcome back. Well, we're on the second chapter of Deviations of Defiance, and that one is called New Friends. New Friend. Aneptius rubbed his eyes and let a yawn go that would inhale a bird. And he did. A tiny brown bird flew straight into his mouth. He coughed vehemently to spit it out. That sparrow let out a song as it flew away, slowly dipping its wing to all those watching. The dwarf continued spitting up all of the feathers left behind in its throat. Already, serfs had stopped to view the unusual sight before it was over. Sure, there were sword swallowers and fire breathers, but never before had any human in Atrodnia seen a dwarf gobble down and spit up an entire live bird before. It was just something unheard of. Perhaps Aneptius would go on to join the traveling act with Samius after all of this was over. After he had gone to the capital, Ostanovka, and completed his sacred mission from the second sublime Prince Cassius. Maybe then he would be able to utilize this remarkable new talent. Everything in the kingdom would be as his god Gorgonis would have it then. He could finally find that dream girl and settle down to a simpler life with her after it was all over. In the meantime, he found the nearest tavern to wash whatever was left from that bird down his gullet. He strode on to the one building that had a sign on the outside of it painted with a three-headed genie pig in greens and blues. It was an average-sized, ramshackle little place that Aneptius had never been to before. But he didn't need familiarity at this point, just a decent-sized pint of any sort to drink. The place was nearly empty, as most decent folk in the town didn't drink before the evening. The only people inside were stooped over their beers or face down in bowls of barley. Certainly not a new sight to Aneptius, as even Atrodnia had its own town drunks who spent all day in the tavern. Aneptius was usually not one of them, and did not envy those poor souls who wound up that way. Aneptius himself could not actually drink too much alcohol, as it stood currently. He would drink down a mug of beer, and already have his head swooning. His friends in Atrodnia used to set him up with 2 mugs of beer and 2 drinks of vodka. Then he would be in the streets throwing up before long. However, sometimes a man simply had a thirst for beer on his mind, or even some of that harder stuff. Cold, crisp, and often tasting terrible. The mind would trick Aneptius into wanting a mug, and quickly his taste buds would revile against it. This is the type of mood that we found our hero in now, as he swept into this downtrodden-looking tavern, the seemingly first one right outside the market, the first one his eye caught. The barkeep was a rotund man, with a belly that shook slovenly every time he laughed at a stupid anecdote or a bad pun. Those were the only types of jokes that were found in this woeful place. He was, however, cleanly shaven, and could be seen to take great care in his facial appearance, with his luscious black curls pulled back and tied into a knot. His apron was full of crumbs and smidges of dirt from years of sitting behind the counter while people told him their sad tales and worries. The bartender's brown eyes crept over Aneptius to see whether he was trouble or not. "Well, hello there, young sir. How can I help one such as yourself at this fine time of day, and at my illustrious establishment, no less?" the tavern keep said, drawing out the last S in a discomfiting lisp, and with a smile that was full of holes. Aneptius scanned the room once again, deciding that, in fact, this establishment was not so illustrious. "How much for a fine mug of beer?" he said after swallowing the last drops of saliva down his dry throat, along with bird remnants. "Why, about 40 groats, I should say. Got me own house beer here, real tasty, and goes down even better with some of this good old-fashioned barley soup. Fill up your stomach real nice. I'd say it's even my favorite thing in town. Aneptius thought it over. His stomach was still rather satisfied from that damn fine kebab earlier, even though it had been so long ago. Yet, he swung up on a rickety stool that creaked loudly as he sat down on it. He really hoped it would not break under his weight. He had a nasty habit of breaking chairs in fine establishments such as this. He wasn't that heavy, especially not for a dwarf, though you never know. And so this nagged at his mind as he moved his legs which were dangling from the ground. Just the beer for now. Gotta slate that thirst first. Maybe I'll have that soup later on, Aneptius said, thinking of the people drunk and face down in that same soup on offer. Barley. He didn't really like the sound of it, and it was strange as normally the harvest season for that crop is towards summer, whereas they harvested wheat usually at the beginning of winter. Aneptius removed the pouch from inside his shirt and measured out the 40 groats for this jolly-looking barkeep. The barkeep showed his holy smile as he reached his hand over to scoop up the copper. He proceeded to jingle it in his hands as his belly was shaking, and he uttered out a hearty laugh, almost too jolly. He moved back to the keg, and then got a surprisingly shiny glass from underneath the bar. The bartender poured out a slightly brownish yellow liquid from the tap into this also illustrious glass. He never gave up the grin that he thrusted in front of Aneptius at the bar. It was ready for the dwarf to drink it up greedily as he looked like a patron who needed it. The barkeep started off with his lisp this time. "So, Master Dwarf, what brings you into our tavern here? Normally, I never see a dwarf sharing a drink in my presence. I must say that Groganus has thoroughly blessed me this day, and that he hath sent you to me. That leads me to ask, then, who are you? What is your business about?" The bar was silent, except for this man's booming voice, though even he toned it down a bit to dispel any awkwardness at being the only one to speak in there. It was as if he knew he was speaking so loud, and actually cared about the other patrons. A couple of drunks stirred at his voice. All they did was groan and fall even further into their various positions of comfort and response. Aneptius scowled at the prospect of sharing any more information with this lug about anything. People were always whispering in the shadows, and money could grease anyone's palms, even out here in the provincial village of Atraneia. There were always multiple interests at play here, normally based around the secrets of their coal and the smuggling of that out of their country. This practice would cost the smugglers their lives. Aneptius took a gulp of the beer. His mouth was surely disappointed at what went down. The taste was more like piss water, though it had been a while since any alcohol entered his belly. Besides potato vodka, that is. Aneptius decided to order a shot of that in addition to the beer. He downed it swiftly, and the young dwarf's mind started to swirl. Aneptius was raised in a home where his parents were always working together, and they were something of a good couple, never cheating and never drinking to excess, though his mother now drank clearly too much whenever she had a chance. Rada enjoyed it, and Rolov made fun of her whenever this happened. Aneptius thought that sometimes she was drowning her sorrows at whatever his grandmother had done to her, but this was only a guess. He had heard some rumors and stories that she was a mighty evil one, that had cursed her family to be serfs for all their lives. But no, that would have been too recent. Their curse of serfdom stretched farther back, to the founding of this above-ground Ramarden. Alas, that tale has long since been lost to the Securidan family. His father imparted on him some things which were crucial to his life of semi-paranoia and honor. Things which involved always respecting women, no matter what they did. Things like bottling up everything inside of him, not saying anything to anybody about what was going on. This made Aneptius into a rather popular young lad in the village. When he grew into his full manhood, he really got used to talking to everyone in Atrudnia whenever he got the chance. He was always seen to have a smile on his face. Each individual person that Aneptius met would really open up a dialogue with him. Sometimes they even nicknamed him Smiley, on account of the smile that he always seemed to wear on his face. Aneptius often repeated the mantra, that if he weren't smiling, he'd be crying. In times of trouble, Aneptius would withdraw into himself. He would stand back from his friends and family in order to really think about what was going on in his life. Aneptius did not talk much about his troubles, but instead, he tried to deal with them on his own without drawing any attention from the people who might be most concerned in Atrudnia. Many times he would do this, and not be seen for a good long while on account of his contemplations into the matters at hand. He was always seen to be a serious boy, with a mind far advanced in years. The village life was dreadfully boring, however. Aneptius had to do all manner of things to make it fun. This was only one of the various things that lightened up his day. Drinking, that is. Otherwise, he found constant enjoyment and a sense of solving puzzles in everything he did involving all of the women in the village. It was a great sense of joy and pride for himself to lead on all of these human girls as to his intention amongst them. Each girl thought of herself as special in that village. None of the ladies could admit to themselves that Aneptius was doing this to them. They all considered themselves too good, and precious to ever even to be considered to be a prospect to be cheated on and to be toyed with. Aneptius, on the other hand, admitted that he brought great joy to their lives, and, on the other hand, saw them as targets by him to be manipulated. He viewed every relationship in plus versus minuses, and sought women who could always give him more positives than negatives. Even when Aneptius fell in love with a new girl, he found himself wondering, am I actually in love with her? Or am I just in love with the things she provides? Aneptius often thought about these questions. He was never able to actually answer them yet. Aneptius would often go from girl to girl in an effort to be with as many women as possible, and really challenge himself. He had to find some way to get rid of the monotony of the days. Everything just seemed to slip by otherwise. He woke up in the village and worked all day in the fields, so it was really only at night that he was able to pursue this game of his with all the village girls. He would visit 2 or even 3 of them in one night, almost exhausting himself in the process. Hell, he did exhaust himself, so it was slightly a blessing in disguise from Gorgonus that our dwarf found himself in this tavern, with him having no idea how those women were doing, and how much they thought of him, or how little. The thoughts of so many women were upon Aneptius almost constantly at first, though he eventually settled on thinking only about his beautiful dream girl. Aneptius was not an athletic dwarf by any means, nor was he someone who enjoyed fighting, but this seemed to grant him strength in even the most dire of times. Who knew? that thoughts could impact people so much. Eneptius stared at his glass, swishing his liquid back and forth in it like those thoughts and memories that had just drifted through his own mind. How some more beer wound up there, he didn't care to question, so long as there was some. Finally, he decided to answer this supposedly jolly tavern keeper. Sure, he had heard stories about the dangers of a loose tongue, but the sublime second had said to be wary. Still, he could only imagine what would be in store for those who spoke too much to the wrong people. But he had only encountered nice people in his life, even though his father constantly warned him to be on guard. But yet again, why bother not trusting people now? The man looked friendly enough to him, and he had a wide grin on his face. Eneptius answered this swarthy fellow. "I'm just passing through, my friend. Give me a break, and another shot of vodka. Things have been too tense of late." The barman hardly knew what to make of this dwarf. He had heard that this race had always enjoyed drink, but he never realized that one so high up would have visited his lowly tavern right outside of the market. For some reason, the barkeep clearly didn't know who Eneptius was. He would not turn down this salacious opportunity to make his way with a dwarf. The tavern keep quickly poured another shot for Eneptius to down. I think this might have been the first time a dwarf had shown up this early. Eneptius was lucky that the bar was even open. Honorian taxed the taverns in his realm almost as much as he taxed the serfs, but just not quite so high. He wanted the serfs to be out of reality on their asses pissed drunk when they had free time. It kept them occupied from their daily lives, and kept them from creating a fuller sense of culture to form around. Honorian feared that day when they would have the wherewithal to form up against his tyranny. Throughout Eneptius's life, he always seemed to rely on the kindness of strangers, and it only seemed to continue when he was an adult. He found it easier in his heart with every drink to trust this guy. Eneptius drank the sour-tasting liquid with gusto, before downing what remained of the beer. The human tavern keep continued to interrupt Eneptius's thoughts. "Well, I've seen the army in town, but I never would have guessed that there was anything going on outside of Atrodnai worth a damn. It all just seems like a horrible trap to get the serfs who are looking for freedom to join up and get executed." Eneptius laughed at this last remark. A lot of people did not believe this outrageous claim, that the army would grant any sort of immunity to humans, let alone anyone who was a serf. Yet, this was the primary initiative set up to convince people to join up and fight. The doubts always gnawed at Eneptius as to whether or not these claims of freedom were true. Doubts always seemed to gnaw at him, no matter what it was about. The tavern owner looked at this strange dwarf straight in the eyes for a piercing minute. "And so, tell me, what the high-flying dwarf doing down here, amongst us lowly types, eh? What have we done to incur the honor of serving a master dwarf like yourself?" Eneptius remained locked together with this man's brown eyes. The azure intensity of his own pupils stared right back, giving more than they received from this fat man. The barkeep broke off, first, almost reeling in the wake of the attention that he had garnered. Eneptius made puffing noises to deride this man, and he said, "I already told you. Things have been too tense of late. All this army business going on. They're trying to find any dwarf to serve. Anyway, I wanted some beer and vodka, and that's what I got. Not some damn innkeep who's going to barrage me with questions. With these words, the red-bearded dwarf hopped down from his stool at the bar, and began to walk away, wobbling a bit. Now, you come back here. I didn't mean no offense by it, sir. Only just trying to make the day go by. Come back. You still owe me for that vodka. The man's jowls shook as he shouted after his retreating customer. I suppose most people this tavern keeper was used to dealing with were completely drunk, or simply just foolish people. But for those types, he had them pay up front. The barkeep made a mistake this time. One didn't expect a dwarf not to pay his bill. Neptius staggered a little on his way to get out of that tavern. He didn't make it very far towards the exit before a friendlier dwarf guided him down to a table in the corner. Neptius was curious. He looked at this dwarf who had guided him so succinctly down to a table. This new dwarf was much more well-dressed than anyone he had seen, besides among Ornorian's company, or those high-ranking aristocrats, merchants, and soldiers. Yet, this dwarf was now sitting next to him, and had lent a hand in his need. Well, thank you for listening once again. Don't forget to pick up a copy, Deviations of Defiance on Amazon. I also have The Kingdom Swell is out now. It's a short story series. It's really good. I think it's one of my best, actually. And that's only 99 cents on Amazon, Kindle. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share it. Share it with your friends. Facebook, Twitter. Follow me on that. I'm on Twitter. I'm at Golson_J. That's GHOLSON_J. You can find me on Facebook at Josh Golson. And I have a LinkedIn too. But anyways, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.